Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
This is a minefield, and unfortunately, as with all minefields, we want a simple explanation. Everyone wants a black and white explanation of how we can determine this. That explanation does not exist, neither in the scientific community nor anywhere else. As I've said before, if we can find a consensus, and we will work towards a consensus, we will certainly work to apply that. Clearly, that's not going to happen at these games, but this is a question also, I guess, in all sports. And I think we are open to listen to anyone with a solution to that question.
The IOC spokesman claims that this is in some ways an issue in all sports, and I don't see this when it comes to the XY athletes. XX athletes attempting to compete against XY athletes. We don't see that. What we're seeing is it's the other way around. The other way around, at least the Umar Kremlev and the IBA, the banment they placed on those two athletes.
The ban the IOC lifted.
And what the concerned parties wish to know now is, when that ban was lifted, what discretion, what rationale was being used? That if the IBA thought enough of the situation to exclude these two fighters from competing against XX athletes on the premise they have XY chromosomes, why is the IOC looking the other way?
You didn't think that was important?
The IOC spokesman claimed that a solution to gender eligibility issues in sports does not exist when one already did.
A solution.
The banment from the IBA. And when that banment came down, it didn't make international headlines. It wasn't international news. It wasn't an international incident like this is being treated.
There was no widespread outrage.
When that banment came down, no, the outrage didn't start until after the IOC allowed these two athletes to compete against XX fighters after these two athletes were banned.
That's when the firestorm started.
So what a guy at the IOC is saying that there is no solution.
Yes, there was, and the IBA came to it. The banment.
Now, what you're looking for is a solution that doesn't ruffle any feathers, a solution that doesn't upset or exclude anyone.
But I thought that's what these two categories were for. Categories for XX athletes, categories for XY athletes.
It's the solution, and that's the way it's always been. You trying to alter that is what's causing the rift.
There was no widespread outrage last year when these athletes were banned. There wasn't. It wasn't an international incident. It doesn't become an incident until you waive that ban.
And on what premise did you waive it? Because of what their passports say? Because of what the passport says? Even after they've already been banned? What science did you offer up to delegitimize the IBA's ruling in favor of your own?
Let's make something clear.
The statements from the IBA's Umar Kremlev are explosive, to say the least.
They are.
He told the Russian agency TASS that the two women had XY chromosomes. And on that basis, the decision was made last year that they should not be allowed to compete against XX athletes.
So when the IOC decides to lift that ban this year, people find out about that, they're going to want to know why.
Are you about to deregulate the standard of competition and what constitutes fair play for no reason other than what it says on these two individuals' passports? Was that the extent of your scrutiny and your look into this situation? Because if it is, some would call that a gross oversight.
While others claim that these are both intersex individuals.
That it is possible for women to have XY chromosomes. According to major medical and health organizations, for example, people with differences in sexual development, DSD, sometimes referred to as intersex, often have atypical genes, hormones, and reproductive organs that differ from expectations generally associated with male and female bodies.
What characterizes a nuanced individual that creates a nuanced situation. The issue is that we don't actually know that that applies here, as neither athlete ever claimed to be intersex.
They never said that. That was never confirmed by either them, the IBA, Umar Kremlev.
It's a presupposition that some people are making to try and characterize the uniqueness of this situation. But it's not proven, it's not confirmed.
If that is what someone is suggesting, that someone is just jumping to conclusions.
That's it.
You don't know that any more than I do.
The
point that I'm making is if these two athletes were banned from competition already for having XY chromosomes, it's up to the IOC to go on a fact-finding mission and not offer up vague explanations that don't really answer the question in the hopes that they don't hurt anybody's feelings.
This ain't kindergarten.
And it's not all-inclusive or supposed to be because that's what the two categories are for. That's what they've been for. One category for XX athletes, one category for XY athletes. Is what the IOC is trying to do is search for a solution that satisfies what everybody wants. Well, that's not going to happen, but that's not your job either.
To give everybody what they want.
The IOC stated that every person has the right to practice sport without discrimination, but some are categorizing their decision as a form of discrimination.
Look at the meme that Luca Amori, who's scheduled to take on one of these athletes next. Look at the meme that she posted. Why do you think she posted that?
But do you imagine the Hungarian Olympian posted a meme like that to their Instagram stories? Seemingly forced into a situation they themselves are not all right with after 4 years of buildup and 4 years of working to get here.
Confronted with this, do they seem all right with the situation?
As you blur the line that separates XX athletes from XY athletes. This isn't what many of those XX athletes signed up for.
State of play.
Now, estimates show that there may be up to 1.7% of people who are born with intersex traits. 1.7%. A nominal percentage of the population, the general population.
It's not even saying that these two fighters are intersex because, as stated, that was never confirmed and they never said that themselves on the premise that they are. Are you about to deregulate the state of play and what constitutes fair play for what are 1.7% of people?
And how would the majority of people on the other side of that percentile feel about that if that is what they are subjected to moving forward?
Odd that it only seems to work one way.
Odd that this really only pertains to XX sports.
How convenient.
The IOC are at fault here. I think they're at fault. I think throughout all of this, they've been deliberately vague. They haven't offered up a good enough reason as to why they lifted the ban that was already in place as of last year. They haven't.
They created this problem.
This firestorm, because when these two athletes were initially banned, there was no firestorm. There was no outrage. The athletes themselves, they didn't even appeal the IPA's decision over what is something that is easily verified. If you are an XX athlete, then surely you'll be able to prove it.
And for the life and longevity of your amateur career and what you aspire to do, then surely you would do that, if that's what it takes.
Neither athlete appealed the IBA's decision. Neither one. Frankly, there wouldn't be any firestorm or controversy at all to talk about if the IOC would have kept the ban in place. No, you created the controversy. You created these waves, these ripples, when you took it upon yourself to deregulate the state of play and didn't have a good reason why.
That's what it looks like you did.
Thus, these Olympics are getting all the wrong attention. Oh yeah, people are talking about them, but for the wrong reasons.
And it's the IOC that's at fault.
At least that's how I see it. Men's featherweight news. The word around the campfire seems to be that former WBC super bantamweight champion, now turned featherweight contender, Brandon Figueroa, will be taking on Puerto Rico's own Christopher Pitufo Diaz, September 14th on the undercard of Canelo versus Berlanga. Another addition to that show.
Yesterday it was reported that the Plant versus Macumbi fight, which was supposed to be going down this month, has been rescheduled for the undercard of Canelo versus Berlanga next month.
Interesting tidbits with this announcement. Brandon Figueroa versus Pitufo Diaz would be a Puerto Rico versus Mexico kind of fight, and the main event is a Puerto Rico versus Mexico kind of show. Canelo's from Mexico, Edgar's from Puerto Rico. That long-standing rivalry in the sport of boxing.
Seems to be the theme. This fight is in keeping with that decorum, but not in keeping with what we've been hearing. You see, Brandon Figueroa is WBC interim champion and the mandatory challenger for Ray Vargas,
the full WBC featherweight champion. And it was initially thought that because Ray managed to stay champion against Nick Ball, he'd move straight into a fight with Brandon. We've been hearing about a fight between Ray and Brandon for over a year now.
Been hearing about that fight since last year.
Some effort to do it on the PBC side of things, and then we hear about this. I mean, I can recall hearing about a Figueroa versus Vargas fight as far back as March of last year. And we know that in June of this one, the fight between them was actually ordered. The fight between Brandon and Ray was ordered by the WBC. If Brandon ends up fighting Pitufo instead of Ray...
What does that mean?
I have the sneaking suspicion that if Brandon Figueroa does end up fighting Pitufo Diaz, it might be because the PBC don't have the kind of money that Ray's people are looking for. Maybe they don't have the kind of money to make that fight happen, so they're making this one.
Put simply, that the money isn't there to make Figueroa versus Vargas a possibility, so they're going with a cheaper alternative, while maybe Ray's signed on to do something else, fight someone else. I mean, maybe the reason that Ray isn't fighting Brandon is because he's unifying with Rafael.
WBO featherweight champion, newly crowned Rafael Espinoza. He's with Top Rank. So what if the reason that Ray isn't fighting Brandon at the PBC is because he's unifying with Rafael at Top Rank? What if Top Rank paid to play, put the money up, and that's what's happening?
What if?
Or what if it's not Rafael he's unifying with? What if they're going to do a rematch with Nick Ball, which would also serve as a unification match for Nick Ball's newly obtained WBA title and Ray Vargas's WBC title?
What if? Questions that need answers. If Brandon ends up fighting Pitufo next, why? What happened to Ray? And what's Ray up to? What is Ray doing?
If the order from the WBC came down all the way back there in June and July have already come and gone. Ray hasn't been stripped. There are no reports indicating that Ray Vargas has been stripped of the WBC title. If he hasn't been stripped, they must have given him a pass to do something else. But what?
We don't know.
Brandon fighting Pitufo? It's not a bad fight. I don't think that's a bad fight. I think that'll be a fun action fight if that's what ends up happening. But that's really not what Brandon wanted. And we know that. He wanted Ray.
There's got to be a reason he hasn't gotten him yet.
It's got to be a reason. And if a unification match is the reason, well, I'm not against that, because I've long maintained that there are 4 champions at featherweight. 4 of them.
When are you guys going to unify?
Because it's about time you did. You know, I really can't remember the last time there was a unified featherweight champion. It's been a while. Let's get that going.
Rumors abound. This is what's out there. Figueroa versus Diaz is next.
Not Figueroa versus Vargas. So let's hope it's because Ray Vargas, is about to unify. And finally, in men's super middleweight news, David Benavidez is the quote-unquote master of his own fate. That's what some people are saying. His decision to continue to compete as a light heavyweight, seemingly abandoning the campaign for a Canelo Alvarez fight. The criticism has been relentless, but Mauricio Suleiman expects it to subside now that David Benavidez has accepted the opportunity to perform as a light heavyweight. Suleiman and his World Boxing Council pressed Benavidez to choose between the interim champion and mandatory challenger at both super middleweight and light heavyweight at 168. Benavidez waited more than 2 years as the #1 contender behind undisputed champion Saul Canelo Alvarez, who repeatedly avoided the Phoenix fighter.
This is according to Lance Pugmire.
Especially this year by selecting former junior middleweight champion Jaime Munguia and unseasoned power puncher Edgar Berlanga as opponents. The takeaway:
tempers would not have flared at all. We wouldn't be here now, and there would be nothing to criticize if it were David Canelo were fighting in September and not Edgar.
Suleiman was blasted by critics and fans for not stripping the 4-division champion Alvarez, whose home country, Mexico, is the same as the WBC's. It's been too much hype from the public and media who do not understand the sport of boxing. Suleiman told Boxing Scene this past Wednesday, "We are not promoters who make fights. We administer the championships." Benavidez reduced the pressure on Suleiman by choosing to pursue the 175-pound title, with Suleiman assuring the 27-year-old contender that he is first in line to meet the winner of the October 12th undisputed light heavyweight fight between 3-belt champion Artur Beterbiev and World Boxing Association champion Dimitri Bivol in Saudi.
Well, that's a good fight too. Benavidez versus the winner of that fight. I mean, that's a great fight. So why are people complaining?
Well, I mean, I'm not in the business of politically correct answers. If you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, it's because they're afraid. It's because they're scared for David. They liked his chances against Canelo Alvarez, who's noticeably smaller,
more than they like his chances against the winner of that fight. When it comes to the winner of that fight, they're afraid that David is going to get beat. And that's why they're not celebrating. That's why to them, this isn't good news. Even though if you're a boxing fan, It should be.
It's his turn, Suleiman told Boxing Scene. There's no more to look into, yet another sanctioning body, the IBF, is going to strip Alvarez of his belt and undisputed claim by rejecting his request for an exemption from fighting his little-known IBF mandatory, William Skull of Cuba.
So Canelo's not undisputed anymore. The winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol will be. By all accounts, David will get the opportunity at what he supposedly wanted at 175 that he wasn't getting at 168. And yet, people are still upset. People are still crying and bitching and moaning.
If what this was all about for David was fighting for all the belts, you have that opportunity.
Though I think you would have to be very naive to think that that's what this was really all about.
Benavidez' promoter, Samson Lukowicz, said, the fighter wants to stop wasting time being dodged by Alvarez, who has said it will take a minimum of $150 million for him to fight Benavidez.
That's a misquote.
It's actually bullshit. That was a comment that Canelo Alvarez made in passing that a lot of people are choosing to run with.
Lance Pugmire and Samson Lukowicz among them.
I love the way David Benavidez is moving, becoming master of his own fate, not waiting on Canelo, fight analyst Chris Algieri said on Wednesday's episode of Pro Box TV's Deep Waters. He always has the best answers. He's a fighter. That's what you want to hear from a young champion. Fellow analyst Paulie Malignaggi said Alvarez's selection of Berlanga at a time when Benavidez is free to fight and will now move on to the light heavyweight division ends this disappointing chapter. Now, I maintain that if news would have broke Canelo's fighting David Benavidez instead of Edgar Berlanga, there would be nothing to criticize and nobody would be upset.
Nobody would be mad. The Canelo fans would back Canelo, the Benavidez fans would back Benavidez, but the news would be received a lot better than news of an Edgar Berlanga fight.
You can ask around. Nobody really likes that fight. I think the one most happy with that fight has to be Edgar Berlanga himself, because he knows that he's going to get a lot of money whether he wins or loses.
That's the truth.
Though, when it comes to David moving forward and what is intended to be his light heavyweight campaign, the truth of his faction of fans and his supporters is revealed that he's getting the opportunity now at 175 that you say he wasn't getting at 168, and still you're unhappy. Why would you be unhappy?
Why should that bother you?
And it's because of what I told you. They're worried that he's going to lose, that he's not so big and bad at 175 if he has to fight the winner of that fight, and that if he loses and he doesn't go on to have a legacy of his own, his career and all of this will be lost in the annals of boxing history.
It'll be forgotten.
As David's ability to tarnish Canelo's legacy is contingent upon his ability to have a legacy of his own. But if he goes up there and starts getting his ass kicked, what legacy?
You're gonna be forgotten.
And the few that don't forget, what they'll remember is that as soon as this guy stepped up in weight, that's as soon as it took him to get found out.
If they do remember him for anything, they may remember him for that, because he didn't have any memorable fights at 168.
Goes up there, starts getting beat, turns out he's not a memorable fighter.
It's a bit of an oxymoron that's what some might remember.
How unremarkable he is.